Did you know that you could directly donate your required minimum distributions from your IRA and lower your taxable income? Contact legacy@acton.org for more info.
Welcome to Acton Line, a product of the Acton Institute promoting a free and virtuous society. I'm Mark Townsend, producer. You can find additional resources in the show notes for this episode, as well as previous episodes of Acton Line at acton.org/podcasts. If you have a comment or an idea for a future episode, you can email us at podcast@acton.org. Acton Line is available to stream on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, and acton.org.
Welcome. My name is Dan Huger, Editorial and Research Fellow at the Acton Institute. Today I'm joined by Dave Hebert, Director of Economics and Economic Freedom and Senior Research Fellow at the American Institute for Economic Research. He's also an affiliate scholar here at Acton and a sort of perennial guest. I love to have Dave talking about things economic. And we scheduled this, like a month ago. And I was like, Dave, we really need to talk about gas prices and the Iran war and everything else. Dave's like, I don't know if all that's going to be going on in a month. And I do not have the economics background that Dave has, but I can predict the future, evidently. Better than I wished I could. Dave, welcome to Acton Line. Thank you for being with us.
Oh, thanks so much for having me today.
So, part of this crisis, everybody notices it at the gas pump. If they don't watch the news, they'll start searching. They've started searching the news to figure out why it is that this is going on. Walk us through kind of the mechanics of how this works, because part of this is there's an Iranian blockade in the Strait of Hormuz. How does that translate into sort of prices at the gas station down the street? People kind of have this intuitive notion that if there's problems in the Middle East, gas prices are going to rise. But how does that actually happen?
Yeah, absolutely. So the Strait of Hormuz and really the Middle East in general is one of the major sources of oil that gets put into gasoline. So the U.S. is also a major producer of oil, but we make the wrong kind, or we have the wrong kind that's not quite as efficient for, refining into gasoline. So when you have this major disruption through the Strait of Hormuz, which is a relatively narrow passageway that if it's choked off, about 20% of the world's oil supply is going to be effectively cut off. That's going to have a huge impact on prices, right? So anytime, in this case, the supply curve shifts to the left, you're going to get less gas available, and you're going to get that gas available at higher prices. And that's exactly what we're seeing. Now, the challenge here, and this is the hard part, it's really fast to see gas prices rise, right? So in the interim months, the Strait closes, gas prices went up fairly quickly, right? Even if you open the Strait tomorrow, let's say, it's going to take a while for those gas prices to start coming back down, if they ever even do. Now, there's a lot of countervailing forces at play with the price of gasoline. But the reason for that is because, look, that gas or that oil is on the other side of the world. It's going to take time to get its way into the refineries, get through that process, and then get shipped out to all the gas stations. Gas stations around the country see that there's a relatively, long-lasting reduction in the availability of gas on the horizon. They're going to start raising prices today because everyone's going to continue buying gas at the same rate today. So it's really fast to see prices go up, and I would expect that it'll take some time for prices to go back down.
Yep. And in Michigan, at least, prices have gone back down a little bit since their peak. I filled up yesterday, and it was, I think, $4.50.
Yeah.
$4.40 because I have a Meyer credit card.
Hey.
But at its peak, we were right around $5 here in the western half of Michigan.
Yeah.
One of the things we heard early on from the Trump administration and people in the administration were that the oil that comes out of the Persian Gulf goes to places like India, goes to places like China. That's not the oil we consume. And they were trying to sort of reassure people this isn't going to affect American oil prices. It obviously has.
Right.
And part of this is, oil is a commodity, and the price is set sort of globally. How does that work with commodities? And when we talk about commodities, we're talking about things like steel, aluminum, rice, grains. These things are a little different than, let's say a particular model of car or something like that. What makes them different, and what makes it so that prices can really change globally really fast, even if whatever it is stuff that would have normally not gone to your country in the first place?
Right. So the reason why commodities prices can change, around the world overnight and fairly quickly, and also fairly uniformly, which is the other part of this, is because a commodity is something that's a lot more foundational for an economy or a society than, a specific model of Ford F-150, for example, right? And so when something happens in an oil market, there's going to be investors who are going to try to come into that and make money off of what's happening. What they're really doing in a case where they expect the price of oil to rise, what they're doing is they're providing capital to oil producing companies that helps them, mitigate some of the cutoff or the reduction in supply. So it is actually a very valuable service. But when, prices start to fall, we also see, these investors pulling out, right? That's removing capital from that industry. And so it does lead to swings. And the reality is that because, oil touches basically everything that we do in a modern society, rice serves as a foundational ingredient to almost every food you could imagine, right? Because of its widespread adoption and because people are going to see profit, and we understand this idea in economics called the law of one price, which basically says if you see the same good selling for different prices in different places, you have a strong incentive to move it from the from the low price area to the high price area. And so because of all that, we can see sort of these investment opportunities being picked up all over the world. And as a result, oil prices all over the world, and steel prices, and aluminum prices, and any other commodity prices tend to move in lockstep around the world because of this.
Yeah. The administration shows some awareness of this reality. One of those things early on in this crisis, they released about 172 million barrels of oil from the Strategic Petroleum Reserve in an effort to move down those prices. So utilizing that law of one price is, hey, the government has sitting on all of this oil. If we introduce it to the market, that'll lower prices generally. Can that reduce prices in a really meaningful way? And on the one hand, and on the other hand, what are the costs to doing something like that to the government? First of all, setting aside these sorts of commodities, which you could do with any commodity. You could do with gold. You could do with staples.
Yeah.
What's the cost of taking those things off the market? And then what's the cost of then trying to affect the market by reintroducing to them at other times?
Right. So at some level, what the federal government is trying to do here is smooth out the price of oil over time. So in principle, if they're behaving in a way that, a private individual would, what we would expect them to do is invest in growing the Strategic Petroleum Reserve during times when oil is cheap, and then release it at times when oil is expensive. What that would do, since they're buying when it's cheap and they're buying in such high quantities, they're probably going to push the price of oil up as a result, right? Because of their massive purchase volumes. And likewise, when they release massive purchase volumes, the idea is that they're going to push the price down for everyone too, right? So it's basically buy low and then, dispense high. They're not exactly selling it, obviously, but they're dispensing it. The challenge here is, what is the purpose of the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, right? A lot of people, myself included, but this is a normative stance, right? We think it's more about strategic things like the military, making sure that we have sufficient fuel to defend the country in case of an actual big emergency where we can't get enough oil, or emergency services such as hospitals, medevac flights, all these kinds of things. Is it prudent to use the Strategic Petroleum Reserve to lower the gas prices of everyday people driving, to and from work, dropping their kids off. It's not clear to me. I'm not going to say it's a obvious violation, but here's kind of the thing. Because of the massive reduction in the availability of gasoline and oil around the world, even releasing 100 million barrels from the Strategic Reserve, that's not going to move the needle on price a whole lot, right? Really what's driving the price of gas coming down in Michigan and around the country right now is the fact that we switched to summer gas instead of winter gas, right? That's a different formulation. It actually uses less oil. It's less fuel efficient for your car. So the cost is still roughly the same, if not more. But at the pump, the price per gallon comes down. You and me feel better. Everything's great, right? So even with the with the release of oil from the Strategic Reserve, the real driver of the cost falling isn't the release, it's the switching to summer gas.
Yeah, which has a lower crude content.
Correct, yep.
We've got another strategy that the administration has employed, and one that free market economists have been very excited about. This is maybe the one silver lining here. If there have been a series of waivers to the Jones Act to let foreign vessels move fuel between different ports in the United States. Why is this a good idea? Not just now, but also this should be the waiver that never ends according to a lot of people. That this is something that has been counterproductive for the American economy and American shipping for a very long time.
So let's give some background on the Jones Act real quick. So it was signed into law, I believe, in 1920, 1923, somewhere around that time period. And the idea was that we wanted to protect the merchant marine, right? The merchant marine basically being the sailors that operate all the merchant ships, but they're also equipped to sail, warships too. And the way that we chose to do it was to make it so that if any vessel, a commercial vessel, is going to sail from one U.S. port to another U.S. port without an intervening step, that ship has to be U.S. built, U.S. crewed, U.S. owned, and U.S. flagged. Okay, so it's those four criteria. And the idea was to protect those people from foreign competition. Foreign sailors back in the 1920s were working at lower wages than their American counterparts. And so we wanted to protect the merchant marine. Fast forward over 100 years, and what do we see? The merchant marine is almost extinct at this point. And the reason is because it's so prohibitively expensive to operate an American ship of this kind of caliber that almost anyone who has one either takes it out of service because maintaining the ship is expensive, which means shipyards around the country have shut down, right? The merchant marine itself, they're almost gone. There's a few thousand left at this point, certainly not very many, right? And what happens is as a result of all of this, the U.S. doesn't have the ships that it would need to transport, say, liquefied natural gas from Texas to New England. We do have some trucks that can do it, along the road. So if you look at like a highway system, right, you would expect that if you were shipping something from, say, Texas to New York City, and you were shipping a lot of something, why not go by boat? It's way cheaper, right? At least in terms of like the costs. But because of this law, the Jones Act, instead what we see are more and more trucks on the road, which means more driving, which means more gas is being used, which means more wear and tear on the roads, which means less safe roads because you're going to have highways, filled with semi-trucks with, liquefied natural gas, chemical shipping, all that stuff. We could, if it were not for the Jones Act, use a ship to take all that from Texas to New England. So it's a really big mystery to people that don't study this. Why is it the case that Texas, which if it was its own country, would be the third largest producer of liquefied natural gas on the planet, right? How is it difficult to get Texas natural gas from Texas up to New England? The answer is the Jones Act. New England actually buys most of their natural gas from Europe because it's cheaper, right? Which is weird, right?
Yeah.
And so this 60-day waiver, which is actually now a 90-day waiver, he extended it, is great at some level. The challenge is the investment required to actually take advantage of this by American shipping firms is going to take a lot longer than 90 days. And so really what we would want to see is not just a 90-day waiver, but an actual just waiver. Straight up, get rid of it. We already do this every time there's an emergency, which is a bit ironic because the Jones Act was supposed to make it so that we didn't have to worry about emergencies. Every time there's a natural disaster, for example, a Jones Act waiver is issued almost immediately so that we can help get crucial materials to where they're needed, right? In this case, we waived it because President Trump recognized that we need to be able to get Texas oil and Texas natural gas up to Boston. You can't do it unless you waive the Jones Act. And so he did. So he's trying in this sense, but unfortunately the time horizon is just too short for entrepreneurs.
Yeah. This is something that you'd need probably legislation you'd probably need an actual repeal of the Jones Act to really get the sort of investment from entrepreneurs to take advantage of this sort of opportunity that now exists under the waiver.
Right.
A lot of economists have looked at how this affects the larger economy. This isn't just a question of making natural gas more expensive in Boston, gasoline more expensive, in Michigan, even fertilizer more expensive in places like Iowa. Those are people can grasp that. They can get their heads around it. There's all sorts of things that use petroleum that, I could see that, how that would affect that, and I could see that its relation to prices there. But it also affects overall consumer confidence and consumer spending. How does this ripple through the economy and even the things that have, although again, as you pointed out, a lot of things, this pen has petroleum in it. There's a lot of stuff. But even that stuff that isn't directly affected, like the economy as a whole, when there are these sort of energy shocks, they ripple through the economy. How does that happen?
Yeah, so look, energy writ large is an input into pretty much everything. I mean, except for a few communities in like Pennsylvania and Ohio, right? Energy is an input into literally everything. And so when you make energy more expensive, everything is going to get more expensive. And this is really going to affect, how consumers perceive the overall economy, which is exactly what we're seeing out of the University of Michigan's Consumer Confidence Index. So what we see there is, consumers are starting to feel worse about the future, right? Why is that? Well, because prices are going up. Right. And then you get, I think it was Kevin Hassett yesterday, saying, hey, we're seeing increased consumer spending. That means that consumers must be feeling good about the economy. And it's like, what? That's not true, right? My Netflix account is like twice as expensive today as it was 10 years ago. Does that mean I'm twice as confident about the economy? Yeah. No, that's just higher prices, right? So it's an interesting time to be alive and studying these things and seeing what everyone's saying about what's going on. Most of it just sounds like nonsense on stilts.
Yeah. One of the things, when people are spending more and when prices rise, people want answers. And they want politicians to do something. So there's been a lot of discussion about things like price controls, windfall profit taxes, gas tax holidays. Senator Sanders was talking about how everybody should get, that we all collectively should get half of all the frontier AI companies. When people are feeling the pinch, this sort of talk gets more traction in political circles. What interventions should we look at that do the most damage? And is there any sort of government response that could be helpful? Jones Act aside, because we've talked about there is something, if you made that permanent, that would actually help address not only this, but a host of other problems having to do with shipping goods from the United States to the United States.
Yeah.
Is there anything that politicians can do to help?
Right. So it's a great question. So the challenge, of course, is that anytime a government intervenes into an economy, it's going to have intended consequences, but also unintended consequences. So the intended consequences of, say, a price control is to lower the price of certain goods, maybe raise the price of certain goods like labor, right? Anything like that. The unintended consequences are often the things that we don't like. So when you lower the price of something through legislation, it's going to be cheaper. for those who can get it. You're also going to introduce shortages. You're going to introduce people having to wait in line, sometimes using violence to get the things that they want. So, Dan, you and I are old enough to remember true Black Friday sales, right? Where you actually had to go to the store at 4 o'clock in the morning. There's a reason why there were more injuries at shopping malls on Black Friday than any other day of the year. It's because the low prices brought out the basic, human vagaries and awfulness that we have to try to get, those precious goods at 20% off or whatever it was, right? If you want a great documentary about it, Turbo Man with Arnold Schwarzenegger.
Jingle All the Way.
Jingle All the Way as well,
Sinbad.
right? There's all kinds of good ones, okay?
Yeah.
So, now people just hit F5 on their computer and wait for Amazon to refresh, right? So much more civilized, right?
Yeah.
And so the reform that I would be looking for is not a price control. It's not a holiday on gas taxes. It's not any of that. The reform I would be looking for is how can we make it easier for people to serve one another? Here it's deregulation or just regulatory reform, permitting reform. So the idea that it takes sometimes more than a year or two just to get the paperwork in order, to get anything done, to build a new business, to start a new opportunity, right? I'm not saying get to zero permitting requirements and let anyone do whatever they want. Certainly, I shouldn't be allowed to perform open heart surgery on people. But at the same time, it shouldn't take 1,500 hours to be a barber. It shouldn't take 1,000 hours and the permission of other people in your market to open up a flower shop in Louisiana, right? So there's ways out of this that allow people to serve one another, to find opportunities for themselves and others. And all of that comes down to permitting and regulation reform.
I live across the street from an abandoned hot tub rental place that was briefly a brewery after it was a hot tub rental place.
Gross.
And that never kind of got the chlorine smell out. It's no longer a brewery for that reason.
Good.
But it's been vacant ever since.
Yeah.
They're just now talking about rezoning that land to do residential there, which is what everything else around it is. And they sent out a notice to me. And there will be people who show up that love their abandoned hot tub rental place and will do whatever they can to keep it an abandoned hot tub rental place because they fear change. And, that's a lost opportunity. And that is something that, doesn't just affect, that happens all around this country every day.
Right.
In a lot of places that have worse regulatory environments than Grand Rapids, Michigan does, where it's an even slower process. When we talk about lines, those listeners that are older than Dave and I will have very vivid memories of lines having to do with gasoline and odd even plate days and filling up. And a lot of people look around at the sort of economic challenges we're facing today and they think it's back to the future sort of thing, that we've somehow traveled back to the 1970s and there's a crisis with Iran and gas prices are high and there's talk of new price controls. Rent control is coming back into style. Like a lot of these things that all of us took for granted post sort of Reagan Revolution as being things that we learned and we'd figured out how to get past these things. They're back. Yeah. And like polyester maybe we'll start getting, bell-bottom jeans.
Yeah.
There's all sorts of things that could be back. I mean, it's going back. The kids are wearing bucket hats now. We're already back to the 90s.
Mm-hmm. Can we go all the way?
Can we go all the way?
Yeah, and we want to bring back 1950s level manufacturing and everything.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So are we back in the 70s or how? I mean, there's a lot that's similar.
Yeah.
But we're also having like great stock market performance. Like it's not a one-to-one.
No.
There's some different things going on.
Yeah, it's certainly not a one-to-one comparison to the 70s or the 50s or the 80s or the 90s, right? We're still very firmly in the 2020s here. But there are striking similarities, right? I mean, we're starting to see inflation creep up.
Yeah.
And we're starting to see unemployment creep up as well, right? And so these are, serious problems, especially for, a central bank, especially for Kevin Warsh, who just took the reins at the Fed. We got Jerome Powell, who said he's going to stay on the board, which personally I think is fantastic, but it's also something that hasn't happened for a while.
Very unprecedented.
Right?
Yeah.
So there's a lot, going on here, and I do not envy for a single second Kevin Warsh. I actually very much envy Jerome Powell, because he now has the greatest job title ever, former Fed chair, right? And so that former is doing a lot of work for him. Warsh is going to have a hard time trying to navigate this. He's got a president that wants us to lower rates. But if you lower rates, the only way the Fed can do that is by engaging in expansionary monetary policy, which is not technically this, but it's close enough for, purposes of our, work, is basically putting more money into the economy. Well, when you do that, you're going to get higher inflation, right? And maybe you'll get lower unemployment, but also maybe not. In such an uncertain world with changing rules by executive decree, there's a reason why Truth Social has a higher percentage of world leaders on its platform than any other social media platform. It's because world leaders know that that's where they need to go to get the latest and greatest orders from the president, because he tweets them out or puts them on,
Truths them out.
He truths them out at 2:00 in the morning, right? And so if you want to know what the president's thinking, you got to go to Truth Social. Right. And that's it's interesting.
It is.
It's a different way of governing.
So in bringing up the Fed and bringing up rates, we now have high interest rates. We have rising prices at the same time, which is unusual.
Yep.
Is the solution to raise rates further?
Ooh, yeah.
Because this is how former Fed Chairman Jerome Powell tried to battle the inflation we started to see during the Biden administration.
Yep.
As it accelerated, his response was to raise rates. That seemed to have worked, at least for a little bit, until circumstances in the world changed.
Yep.
Can rates go higher? Should they go higher? That's very politically unpopular, because if you're buying a home today, you're noticing this is not pleasant.
Right.
If you are in the market for credit, it is not a pleasant market.
Right.
My wife bought a car 6-8 months ago. Rates were much lower.
Yeah.
I look at her rate now and I'm great, but I had a sub 3% rate on my last car loan, which is a world different from what we're paying for her vehicle now. And even that is, looking in the rearview mirror from today. Yeah. Her deal's pretty good.
Yeah. I mean, I had a less than 1% rate in 2014. Yeah. It was awesome. I was like, can I make this a 20-year loan? They said no, because they're not that misguided. Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, look, here's the issue that the Federal Reserve has. By law, they have two things that they have to try to accomplish. One is promoting price stability, right? So basically keeping inflation at a reasonable rate. The second is promoting or doing what they can to help promote full employment. Now, here's the interesting caveat. Whenever the Fed wants to, let's say, lower the unemployment rate, they're going to have to print money, stimulate the economy that way, but that's going to lead to higher inflation. And whenever the Fed wants to lower inflation, they're going to have to pull money out of the economy, right, or engage in contractionary monetary policy, but that's going to raise the unemployment rate. And so this dual mandate is really a walking contradiction. You can't do both at the same time. You have to pick, are you going to focus on price stability or are you going to focus on labor market conditions? This is why, last summer, Jerome Powell delivered his remarks, I believe in July, where he said, the economy, the conditions of the economy now are such that we can focus on the labor market. And then he announced the quarter point, reduction in the interest rate targets. Kevin Warsh has said that, look, inflation is the Fed's fault, right? He's very much an inflation hawk, or at least he pretends to be one on TV. We'll find out together if he actually is. And so if you've got rising inflation, you might want to actually raise the interest rates. the challenge right now is that we have high unemployment and rising unemployment too. And so that signals that the Fed should actually lower rates. So there's all kinds of crazy things going on right now. And this is why I do not envy Kevin Warsh. And I bet Jerome Powell is breathing a massive sigh of relief that he no longer has to lead an institution and pick, hey, do I want to help consumers out on prices, or do I want to help workers out in terms of economic opportunity? The challenge, of course, is, who's being hurt the most in the labor market? It's young people. Is expansionary monetary policy actually going to help, these workers in the age of AI, where AI is replacing a lot of entry-level jobs? It's not clear. So I don't know what Warsh is going to do. I'm really excited to find out, and I'm sure everybody's going to be talking about it, criticizing him, praising him. We're going to find out.
Yeah. One of the things, the last time we had this sort of spike in energy prices was back in 2022, when the Russia-Ukraine war began. Lots of countries put in pretty severe energy sanctions on Russia. Some are starting to lift them now. Great Britain is now buying jet fuel from Russia.
Yep.
That's sort of unraveling. There were also a lot of nations like India that just sort of said, you know what, if Russian oil is cheaper, that's fine. We're happy to buy it. We're just not going to participate with these other nations in doing the sanctions. And as a result, everything kind of smoothed out.
Yeah.
We have, as we began talking about, this very narrow physical choke point. If either the United States is able to secure a sort of military victory where the strait is cleared of the Iranian Navy, or if peace is able to be attained, how soon do you think we'll look at normalization of these prices? Because there's certain bottlenecks that have happened now. You can't just undo this. But there's also, part of those prices are also priced in people's expectations that this is closed and it might remain closed. And like, if it were to suddenly open up, either due to a sort of military end of the conflict or a diplomatic end of the conflict, we could see prices move, maybe not all the way, but a little bit very quickly. What would that look like?
So, there's two kinds of things. One is, do we believe that the conflict is truly over? So both sides could come out, shaking hands, raising each other's arms in victory, embracing each other with hugs and, photo opportunities. But if people don't actually believe that the conflict is over, that it could be reignited with a social media post or something being interpreted the wrong way, prices are going to remain elevated as people continue to speculate, right? The second thing is you've got to think about the pipeline, if you will, of getting oil out of the ground and then into your gas tank, right? There's an intermediary, there's actually lots of intermediary steps, but there's a crucial one here, and that's the refinement process. Now, with less, oil making it to those refineries, I'm willing to bet, and I haven't looked this up, but maybe I will, and this will become my next article this week. But I'm willing to bet that there have been some layoffs at these refineries, that certain lines of production have been shut down or are working at less than full capacity. Those are going to have to be ramped back up. Those workers are going to have to be recalled or rehired and retrained, right? That's all going to take time. So you can have, the strait open up and you can have the shipping, resume at its current or its previous volume and get all that crude oil into those refineries. But if there's not enough workers to actually refine that crude oil into the gasoline, into the diesel, into the kerosene that we need, then it doesn't really matter. There's a massive choke point there. And so that's why it's going to take some time for gas prices to actually come down. They might start coming down. I'm not going to dispute that, right? We've already seen that with the arrival of summer gas, which, thank God for summer, right? I don't know if I like summer gas, but I like summer. And so I do expect that, prices will come down as sort of the conflict hopefully winds down and hopefully a peaceful resolution is found and hopefully we get the strait opened up and hopefully people believe in it. But the bottleneck is going to be that refining process, right? And shipping it, right? Keep in mind, you got to ship it. And no one's, operating container ships for free, right? If there's nothing on them, they're not going. So we're going to have to get those back in the water. There's a whole bunch that has to happen, and it's just going to take time.
Looking at the big picture, I had a conversation with Ann Bradley about sort of affordability, and we talked a little bit about how these geopolitical events can affect the economy. And we've talked in a lot more detail, you and I, about exactly how that happens. What should folks take away from this? What lessons do you hope that statesmen learn from this in the future? That this was an operation that I think everybody in the administration genuinely believed would be shorter, would be much more successful, which could have resulted in a sort of political transformation of Iran that would have been great, amazing.
Yeah.
But it seems to have entrenched. I mean, the Iranian regime was decapitated, but not changed.
Yep.
It seems to have be more resilient than the administration forecasted, and the costs have certainly been higher than they anticipated, and the costs to sort of the global economy have been higher. How do we balance out? Because it's also sort of like, can we put President Trump has been unequivocal in saying that Iran cannot have nuclear weapons.
Right.
And that this is sort of worth the cost, that alternative is so dire and so bad that this needs to happen. Economists are very great at the compared to what question.
Right.
Everything has a cost, and those costs need to be counted.
Yeah.
Even if politically it's not popular to talk in those terms all the time. What do you hope folks learn from this that might be in a position like this in the future, where they have, on the one hand, a geopolitical opportunity, but on the other hand, they could potentially destabilize the world's economies?
Yeah. So I think what I would hope is that we learn, a few things. So one is just how wide-reaching oil and any commodity, but any, economically valuable thing is. So in this case, I highly doubt that U.S. officials and, Middle East officials, I highly doubt they anticipated that, this would be the cost, right? And had they anticipated it, maybe they would have adopted different strategies earlier on in this scenario and everything. The second thing I think I want people to learn is how sticky institutions are. So look at the efforts that the U.S. has gone in to try to spread democracy around the world. How many times has it been successful? The answer is very few, if any. Okay.
Germany.
Yeah, Germany.
Japan.
Sort of, yeah. So there's two, right? I mean, and it's been a minute since we succeeded, right? And so, but think about, we were going to bring democracy to the Middle East. Instead, we fought Al-Qaeda for a while, and then Al-Qaeda rose to power in Afghanistan, right? So how successful are we at spreading these, different or institutions? And what I'm getting at is institutions on the ground fundamentally match what the people in that community expect. I'm not saying value, what they expect, right? There's an old phrase that people don't change their ideology like they change their underwear, right? It's why the Soviet Union in that transition period from a command and control to a more market-based economy wasn't, instant and overnight, and why there were so many people in, 1993 Russia that wanted to go back to the Soviet Union, because it matched what their expectations were for how things were going to work. It's the same thing we're seeing in the Middle East right now. We decapitated their, government. It didn't do much, right? Like one guy's dead, that's sure. But in terms of overall, what that government is doing, it's about the same. And so what that means is that there's a lot more persistence in these things than we might think, right? We can't just walk in, take out a person and think we're going to change a system, right? And that system being, inculcated by the culture of the people there as well, right? Even if you could try to change the system, the people are going to revolt too, because it doesn't match what they're expecting.
Yeah. One of the things that I always love having you on to talk about is the economy. And one of the reasons for that is I think you're very good at teaching and about walking people through these things. You were a teacher for many years.
Yeah.
You were still teaching people. You're teaching people right now. You're also now doing a new sort of venture on your Substack that I absolutely love, in which you're trying to do some economics education, but to enlist AI's help in this education.
Yep.
Could you describe a little bit of what you're doing? Because I think it's fascinating.
Yeah, absolutely. So I have a Substack. It's called Economics Reality Check. And I use that Substack to post, letters to the editor that don't get published. I use it to post talking points whenever I do media. But lately, I decided to try to have some fun with it. So from my, 10 years as an economics professor, I have something like 4,000 PowerPoint slides just sitting on my computer. And I actually went through and I didn't count, but kind of like took a sample and extrapolated. 4,000 is about the number, okay? And so these are, things that I spent years developing. And I figured, well, Claude is a thing. They keep coming out with new models. Let's just see what Claude can do if I just put this in and say, hey, write me an article based on these lecture notes. The latest model, which I just played with last night for this morning's post.
4.8.
It has pictures in it. So now Claude can make pictures. And so I said, hey, include any graphs that would be relevant, skip over, because my slides would have, this will be on the exam. It's like, well, it doesn't need to be in the Substack post. But I have Claude, write the first draft. I will copy edit it for an hour or two at least, and I will double check everything to make sure that it's correct before I, post it. I never just copy and paste, from Claude into Substack. I did actually catch a mistake that 4.8 made. Yeah. It drew, I didn't put this on the article, but when it drew the supply and demand graphs for the first time, it drew them backwards. It had upward sloping demand and downward sloping supply, despite the fact that my lecture notes very clearly state that demand slopes down and supply slopes up. So if the most powerful model in the world can't even get supply and demand right, you're going to have to double check it, right? So I've been having a lot of fun. This is a personal project for me. It's not affiliated with AIER or anything like that. It's just, how far can I push AI and just see what it can do? And it's just been actually like really, really fun.
It has been really, really fun to read.
Yeah.
This is the way that, I could be a student of Dave Hebert. I never had the privilege, other than, informally.
Yeah.
But I basically get to take your economics class through this with the help of Claude. Actually sort of generating a lot of the content. Now, Pope Leo the 14th, it's just come out with an encyclical called Magnificat Humanitas. It addresses AI among a number of things. I don't know if you've had time to read it. It's very long. Yes. You obviously put in some thought in using Claude into sort of how to use this ethically and transparently with your readers. And what you've told me as we're sitting down here is something you also spelled out when you began this project on your Substack.
Yep.
How do you think about the ethics of AI? And has the Pope caused you to think about, you were thinking about it before this encyclical, because this project began before this encyclical. You laid out some sort of ground rules for yourself. Has the Pope written anything that's changed how you think about it? Or if not, just how have you been thinking about it in terms of what's ethical, not only for this project, but for intellectual work and writing in general?
Yeah. So the Pope hasn't changed my mind just yet. He's helped me clarify some things, but he hasn't, caused me to reverse my position on, pretty much anything to do with AI. But here's where I think it matters. What matters with AI is obviously how you use it. Now, I'm very lucky in this regard. In a week, I will be 39, right? Which means that I'm like that age where I vividly remember the encyclopedia salesman coming to the door and selling us a set of encyclopedias. I very much remember not having a computer in the house. I remember getting the computer, but not having internet. Right. And having, Encarta on CD-ROM. So, and I went to Hillsdale and we didn't get Wi-Fi on campus until I was a junior. And so I remember, even having the internet, I could only do it in my dorm room and at the computer lab. And that was it. If you wanted to learn something, you had to go read. right? And so I have this experience of going and tracking down information, right? Then when, Google becomes more widespread, well, Google for me is just a faster version of like the Dewey Decimal System or the card catalog, whatever, right? So it's just a faster way to get to information. It's not doing work for me. It's enabling me to do my work faster. Same thing with Claude and any other AI, right? So I'm not using Claude to do something that I can't do. I'm using Claude and AI to help me do things faster, more efficiently, right? Give me new insights. The post this morning contains a description of substitutes being an or good and complements being an and good. Mm-hmm. I never thought of that.
That's a great analogy. I read it this morning.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, when it came out of the prompt that I gave it, I even wrote to Claude, I'm like, that's an amazing analogy. Where were you 10 years ago? Like, that would have helped me teach so many people so much more effectively. And so, like, that's a new insight. That was valuable. So could I come up with that on my own? Maybe, but I didn't, right? So it is helping me. It's a tool that I'm using to do more, right? What I see a lot of college students, young people, people that are trying to take, for want of a better phrase, shortcuts, is they're using this tool to do things that they cannot do themselves or that they haven't practiced doing, so they don't understand, what it is that's going on. So, I like to pretend that I'm at least a halfway decent writer. I'm not going to have Claude write for me. There are a lot of college students that, frankly, are terrible writers. They are having AI write for them, and it shows. And so when you use AI responsibly, and this is where I'm getting at and why I'm up front on my Substack, hey, this was generated by Claude. I used this model, right? Here's what I'm doing. Here's my workflow, right? When you're using AI to help you do something that you can do, it's an incredibly powerful tool. When you're using AI to do something that you yourself cannot do, and then presenting it as if it were work that you did do, that's not only disingenuous, but it's harming yourself. It's preventing you from learning that skill that's actually going to be valuable.
Dave, thank you so much for teaching us the skill of being able to read sort of the economic signs of the times and interpret our world through the economic way of thinking. You do a fabulous job every time here through your work with AEIR and also now through your Substack with your handy assistant Claude. Thank you so much for being with us.
Oh, again, thanks so much for having me today.
Thank you for listening. If you'd like to learn more about Acton or hear more of this podcast, please visit acton.org/podcasts. Otherwise, we'll see you next week.